Good afternoon, everybody. This is About the Labor Live pregame edition for Vikings 49ers. What a day. What a huge game. Obviously, hot take. A source from the Vikings said this is a big game. I wanted to hang out with you guys, obviously, before the game, see how you're feeling about everything. I got some new stuff in my background. My background is so cluttered. I got to get this figured out. I always like to, though, before games, see how you guys feel, get your final score predictions. I know we did that earlier in the week, but I thought it would be better that we had our final scores today because I said that's what we would do. Also, the chat is up for this, so if you are new to the show, I'm Joe Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com and VikingsTerritory.com. We are streaming across multiple social media channels, but I can see your comments. I read them on air, questions too, and we usually start the show out. This is a new thing, but with a roll call. So if you're here and you want to participate in the show, you don't have to. We're a nice group of guys. Type like middle school or high school that you're here, and your score prediction. You can say here, present, what's up, let's go, skull, aquí, if it's Spanish class. Other than that, I wanted to just talk about the game a little bit, obviously, and my feelings on it. To start, I would say if you guys have watched more than a couple of these shows, last week it was a relatively emotional roller coaster. Building up to the Saints game, I really felt and still feel that this team, position by position, is the most talented in the entire NFL. And a lot of my frustrations, I think, can be misconstrued as perhaps being negative for effect or for just being a contrarian or something. But really, it comes from a good place. It comes from a place of me loving this team and just being frustrated by the outcome of some of these contests, namely Monday Night Football, and seeing, okay, as a guy who is not an X's and O's guy, who, writes from a perspective of, I do some analysis, but a lot of it is kind of wearing my heart on my sleeve. And it's you feel like you're banging your head against the wall when you see this team doing things that time and time again they should have learned do not work. And so I initially wasn't too high on the Vikings' chances because I just didn't trust the coaching staff to lean into some of the things that when they've shown that they've done them this season, the team has excelled greatly on offense. Cousins was putting up identical numbers to Mahomes' MVP numbers in 2018 for a long stretch, and then they get away from it. They get away from the play action rollouts. They basically put him in a shotgun and then just have him stand in the pocket, something he's just not good at. So I wrote an article about that, about the window of opportunity closing, the team not really understanding why. And then the more I thought about the quote in that article that kind of perplexed me, the one where Zimmer, after the Monday Night Football game, essentially said, well, we didn't run any rollouts or bootlegs because they wouldn't let us. I'm paraphrasing. And then a couple days later, he changed his tune. That's a quote from the Star Tribune. He changed his tune and said that, yeah, essentially they need to get him out of the pocket more. I thought that, okay, it's a little frustrating that the head coach didn't really know what was going on, whether it was a game plan or an execution thing. And that it took 4 days for him to realize that, week 16, that maybe we should get him out of the pocket more. But clearly the message was received, and I know building up to the game last week, I said on the first play or the first drive of this game, we're going to know whether or not the Vikings are going to make a game of it. And in the live chat that we do on both sites, purplePTSD and VikingsTerritory.com, on the homepage and in our message board, I said on the first play, all right, it's going to be a game. It was a blown up play. It was play action. I believe a little bit of a play action draw Cousin tried to roll out, it didn't work, but it showed that okay, they're gonna play that sort of game. I'm presuming that that'll carry over to this week. It's a short week too, which a lot of people have pointed as being negative. But I feel like some of the times that this team has gotten in trouble in big games is when they've had too much time to prepare for it. And I think Zimmer and company tend to get to the right game plan about 3 days before the game. And then all of a sudden they add a bunch of new wrinkles, and everyone just gets confused and ends up thinking and not playing. Let's see who's here. Elaine from LA asked me what time do they play. 3:25, I believe. There has to be a more efficient way for you to figure that out than to come to my show and ask. I'm not being a jerk about it. I just think it's funny. Elaine is also a Saints fan, so that explains it. Unless Sirius sent you here, which, I mean, that would make sense. She said she's disappointed in her Saints. Aren't we all? I'm not mad, Sean Payton. I'm just disappointed. Calvin says Skull 24-14 Vikings pull away in the second half. I hope so. I really, I don't think that the Niners are as dangerous of an offense as the Saints, obviously. They're not a quick strike offense, at least when compared to the Saints. Yes, they did beat the Saints. Yes, they almost scored 50. But I don't think their game plan is anywhere near what the Saints do in terms of quick strikes and down the field shots. I mean, I know Deebo Samuel is their guy in that regard, but they like to use heavy personnel, run the ball, play action, cross the middle to Kittle, so on and so forth. And so I really think that one of the keys to this game is getting up early and letting your defense sort of pin its ears back, whatever the hell that means, and go after Garoppolo. That's how this team is comprised. That's when they play best, is when they have a lead. Beyond that, looking back at week 1 of last season, when they started the season against the 49ers, I understand completely different situation. Garoppolo has blossomed since then. I feel like there's a puberty joke in there somewhere. You can't compare even a lot of teams 1 month removed to the next month. So I'm just grabbing a few things from that game. But there's an interesting quote that Everson Griffin had after that game, which was that they got essentially Garoppolo was playing scared. He was pressured a lot. I think there were 3 sacks in that game, and that quote resurfaced this week because stuff like that is used as bulletin board material by these head coaches to show players or teams we're underdogs. No one believes in us. Rah rah. Let's. Zimmer is masterful at doing that, and when Garoppolo was asked about that, he had an interesting response to it, which was, I hadn't heard that. Pressure is good on a quarterback. It opens up throwing lanes or opportunities and lanes. That's true. Kind of. If it's pressure from the front 4, I don't see how that opens up opportunities. I could see if he's talking about a blitz where you send in somebody who otherwise would be dropping back into coverage. But if you were getting organic pressure from your defensive ends, especially, there might be. I don't even think so, though. I don't. I know he's trying to get a silver lining from it, but I don't see how that is true. If there's consistent pressure from the front 4, especially the defensive ends, I know sometimes they drop back into coverage, so I guess you could say that. But yeah, I just think he's trying to save face a little bit there. That's Benry, my morbidly obese deity. But I think that if you watch that game, that's true. He got flustered. I mean, I think he had a sub 50% completion rate in that game. Yeah, 15 to 33. That's like Cousins against the Packers the first time. 261 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 picks. I've talked about that this week, and I got some flack from some 49ers fans, but a lot of the weaknesses, I just posted an article on VikingsTerritory.com about what the national media is saying about this game, and I mainly focused on an article from Greg Rosenthal from NFL.com. He's one of the editors over there, and in that, I linked to an article from the Sacramento Bee that talks about the strengths and weaknesses of Garoppolo this far. And one of them is that he's, doesn't set before he throws. One is that he's bad at looking off coverage. One is that he's bad at especially looking off the deep safety. That he's not entirely accurate outside of the hash marks. He's good across the middle for obvious reasons. He's throwing to the best tight end in the NFL. But a lot of his weaknesses to me sound like prime opportunities for Anthony Harris and company to get some interceptions from him. Now, that hasn't really extrapolated out and turned into a ton of turnovers for Garoppolo, but the opportunity is there. I think that the other thing that is that's important that they pointed out is that he's not really great at looking beyond his first receiver in his progressions. So when you have a guy who, essentially what that means is once he looks at the first progression, he's going to either check down or throw to that guy. He's not looking off the safety. He's also not entirely accurate. All three of those things to me scream interception. And this Vikings team knows how to rattle him. And again, it's a different player even. It's a different time. But these defensive ends and defensive linemen and the entire defense remembers that game. They remember the little tricks that they used. They remember how they got to Garoppolo. They remember his mannerisms. They remember all of it. I'm sure they watched that tape ad nauseum this week. And so that encourages me. Tang says Vikings need to run like crazy. Calvin says correct. But to open up lanes, you need 7 rushing the passer. 5 and 6 is even. Stevens with a rush. 6 defenders versus 5 offensive linemen versus a QB. Yeah, I get what you mean. I agree, Tang, also that they need to run like crazy. In terms of pressure, yeah, I just mean that's like the first point. Rattling Garoppolo. And to do that, you have to attempt to make this a one-dimensional offense. And there's a stat that came out this week that a lot of Vikings people haven't been talking about, but that's that the Vikings are the worst defense in the NFL against the 21 personnel package, against the run in 21 personnel. Unfortunately, the 49ers run 21 personnel runs more often than any other team at 38% of the time. And that seems like a really big deal, but the problem is, and I'm going to save my cat from herself, she gets really excited and attacks her own tail because she thinks that her tail is stealing whatever she's excited about. This is why I like to do this when my fiance's here, and this is also why I'm a dog person. Hey, what do you got? A corn dog. Wow. Cool. That was worth it. I don't think that stat is as bad as it seems. Yes, the 49ers run that 38% of the time. But, and I apologize for that, but most teams run it 9% of the time. And so that's just the personnel grouping. That doesn't mean those are 9% are all runs. It just means that's the formation that they use. And it means that the Vikings haven't seen it that much. And so it's a small sample size. And because of that, if you have one bad game, it inflates everything. And so I'm not as worried about that because the Vikings are also a team that disproportionately, at least compared to the average, run heavy personnel packages. They also run a zone blocking and running scheme, and that's exactly what Kyle Shanahan runs because his dad is Mike Shanahan, and that's what he's known for. And so having a guy like Kubiak in your front office that can stop by and say, okay, here with Rick Dennison, here's how you can exploit this, here's how you can shut it down, so on and so forth. I'm sure that happened. And so, I know a lot of people, Niners fans are really focusing on that, but, I have faith. I have to at this point. I have faith that Zimmer has something special dialed up in that regard. I'm sure. I mean, going back to the one-dimensional thing, I think that, again, if this Vikings defense was able to rattle Drew Brees, a Hall of Fame guy, breaking all sorts of records, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, is rattled Garoppolo, who was rattled against this Vikings defense week 1 of last season. Keep in mind, the Vikings defense was terrible to start the 2018 season. The first 4 or 5 weeks, Zimmer came out and said, you know what, I made it overly complicated. We simplified things and just got back to what we're good at and let the guys play. If that was them playing bad week 1, imagine what they learned from that. Imagine all the tape they have now. Garoppolo was still, he had 5, 6 games to end the 2017 season. I think it was 5, and he went undefeated. And then he comes out week 1 and puts up a stinker. And the Vikings didn't have a whole lot of tape to go off of. Beyond that, I just don't think that Raheem Mostert or Breda, I mean, Breda's fast, but they're not, neither of them are top 10 running backs. You know what I mean? Like, they're not that great of athletes as compared to Dalvin Cook. And so I think that stat isn't as bad as the flip side, which is that the 49ers are 22nd in the league in terms of across the board, not just one personnel package that is run less than 1 in 10 times on average by teams. 22nd in the league in regards to yards allowed per run. I would take that all day. I would take the right side of this offensive line opening up massive holes, running off tackle with Dalvin Cook. I think that the Vikings running game will end up having more yards than the 49ers one. And if they do, they will win. An interesting stat from Reed's article on VikingsTerritory.com that went live this morning. The Vikings are undefeated when they run the ball more than 30 times under Zimmer. Guess how many times they've done that? 40. And they're undefeated? Oof. But yeah, I mean, if you can stop that run game or limit it, and you put the ball in Garoppolo's hands, you've got a really good chance. Money Team 545. What's up, man? Is this Rants? I don't know what that means. What is your name? My name is not Rants. I didn't know that was a name. Tang says, my problem is we will hold the running backs in check, but then end up giving a big run. That's a good point. That's a very Vikings thing. We saw that against the Broncos, I believe. No, it was the Chiefs, right? Oh, yeah, I forgot my cat jumped up and scratched my face while I was sleeping last night. Yay, cats. There's that. I mean, it's the same thing on in the passing game. In the Saints game, they were essentially shutting them down, but then they gave up, and by they I mean Xavier Rhodes. And in Xavier Rhodes' mind, it was Harrison Smith's fault somehow again. They'll give up a big play probably here or there, but I think for the most part they're going to slow this game way down, and get the crowd out of it. That having been said, I wouldn't mind seeing some up-tempo stuff out of this offense to start the game. But they're going to run, play action, get the crowd out of it, so on and so forth, and attempt to make Jimmy Garoppolo beat them through the air. And I don't really know. I just feel like So if you guys go to VikingsTerritory.com and read my article, I was again covering Greg Rosenthal's coverage of the games this weekend. He did pick the Vikings to win. He also picked the Packers to win, which would be an amazing game and a terrifying one at the same time. Oof, Vikings Packers NFC Championship. Yikes. He starts out by saying a couple of dubious things. One was that this is a weaker than average NFC field. I don't understand how he believes that. This is much more competitive than usual. Beyond that, this cat is killing me. There's also the fact that he essentially said that the Vikings are not your average 6 seed. They're the second best team left talent-wise, roster-wise, in the NFC behind the 49ers. I don't understand that either. This is position by position. I think the Vikings are better than the 49ers, maybe outside of the offensive line, but they have injuries there. Corn dogs, I tell you. If you look at the offense, for example, Dalvin Cook's better than what they have, and Mostert and Breda and Tevin Coleman, Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen are better than the trio of linebackers. Emmanuel Sanders is good, but he was always kind of second fiddle in Denver. He's more of a possession guy than anything else. He's not that big. He's arguably even kind of a slot possession guy. Deebo Samuel's an emerging talent, but he's kind of one-dimensional. You could say, obviously, Kittle is better than Kyle Rudolph, but when it matters, it's kind of a push because Rudolph is lethal in the red zone. He's lethal in the end zone. He's also caught about, as I always say, almost 85% of the passes thrown his way. He just doesn't, he's not as fast. He doesn't get as much yards after the catch, so on and so forth. Beyond that, if anyone wants to adopt a cat, I'm kidding. My fiance would kill me. On defense, too, I just think position by position, and maybe I'm being a homer. I know their defense is better than ours statistically, but there's just so much talent on this Vikings defense. And the most important part of the Rosenthal article was the continuity. He talks about how 8 of the Vikings' 11 defenders have played at least 5 seasons under Zimmer. That's huge. They returned 10 of 11 starters from last year, the 11th person being someone who was gone for a season in Seattle and then played for the Vikings before that. So when you have that continuity, you essentially... And while Zimmer is always adding new wrinkles and everything to his defense, and he kind of doesn't like the label of AA gap blitz scheme because I think he feels he's moved way beyond that. It means that this defense can do things like it did against the Saints. It can bring out new wrinkles that we haven't seen. And while that, again, I get that I'm kind of walking a tightrope here because I've said things like, well, look at the NFC Championship game. They added too many new wrinkles. When they have too much time on their hands, they maybe have the right game plan 3 days ahead of time, but then they had too many wrinkles. I think that maybe it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but really what I mean is that this defense has seen everything and they've seen it together, and it's predicated on doing your job and trusting the guy next to you, and they trust one another. They've seen everything and they know how to stop it, and I think that Zimmer has finally learned some of those lessons, and he knows any wrinkles that he does add are for a very specific reason. They're not too complicated. They won't really affect the player's ability to play, and by that I mean they won't really be something that they're too busy thinking about as opposed to just playing. And by playing I mean reacting instinctively, doing things that you're not using your prefrontal cortex because it's all just reaction and reflex, and that's important. And so I think that 21 personnel number is kind of blown out of proportion, but I also think that they'll have an answer to it. Um, Calvin says, this isn't a self fulfilling prophecy. If you run 30 plus times in a game, that typically means that you're ahead and that you're using up the clock. Yes. It doesn't always mean that, but that's part of it. I'm not going to pretend like it isn't. But it also means, I mean, you don't get to 30 rushes by garbage time running the ball that many times. I mean, typically when you run the ball to eat up the clock, you do it on the the second to last and last drives. Um, you still do more running in the second half than you otherwise would, but you're still throwing the ball and still trying to pick up first downs. That also implies that the Vikings won these games by tremendous amounts where they can just do 3 and outs by running 3 times. That's not necessarily the case either. I think that it more talks about this stat specifically for the Vikings just means that you've had a game plan where you've run the ball a lot and then you run it to kill the clock at the end. I think that you would have, if they were to lose those games or were losing those games, they would have had 25 touches, rushes anyway. That's a really good point though. But I don't think it's that cut and dry. I mean, with everything there's nuance, so I'm sure that's part of it. um Tang says Garoppolo's good at carving up defenses in the middle of the field. Yes, that's his strength, and it's for obvious reasons. That's because of Kittle, but the Vikings are the number one defense against tight ends. They've played every good to great tight end this season, it feels like. Zach Ertz, Travis Kelce, Hunter Henry, um, Noah Fant even. And they've given up a 1 touchdown against the tight end, but no touchdowns against the elite tight ends. And so, especially if you're able to limit what Sanders and Samuel can do, Kittle's not going to put up 200 yards. You know what I mean? Like, if a big game for a tight end, for Kittle, is 100 yards. That's, they're not built that way. And so everyone's like, well, I'm not, a lot of 49ers fans are like, I'm not worried about it because, you could shut down our receivers. We have the best tight end. And it's like, yeah, well, tight ends don't, you're not going to get enough out of your tight end to win a game, And again, I think they're really good against tight ends. I've said this all week. I would have felt tremendously better if Curse was playing, but Sendejo is physical and he's up for the challenge. Barr, so on and so forth. They know what they're doing. Tank says Kevin Stefanski has to scheme the passing game better, in my opinion. Need to get both Diggs and Thielen involved along with Rudolph. He needs to show that he's the head coaching candidate and not a product of Kubiak. I agree with you on that. I don't know where one starts and the other ends. I mean, I think I do. I think when we see tight end stuff, when we see more heavy personnel stuff, but I do think that it would be nice to really get the ball to 7 or 8 receivers in this game. Pick your poison. Especially all week I've said it's, ironically, it should be a tight end thing. Irv Smith Jr. breakout game. Kyle Rudolph, very consistent. I'm sure they're going to scheme to take Diggs out of it again. No one really knows what's going on with Thielen. I think some of that was overblown for a reason. But Thielen's back in terms of rust. He looked amazing in the second half of that game and in overtime. I can't imagine a cut on your foot, even if it's really deep. It's painful, but it shouldn't really affect anything in regards to how he runs his routes. I mean, it's going to hurt like a bitch. It might even rip open and bleed, but he should be all right. Tank says, if other teams can do more with lesser receivers, then Stefanski needs to get his stuff together. Thank you for saying that. That's a really good point. The Vikings, I think, are 22nd or 23rd in the league in regards to overall passing offense, and I think that's a yardage-based stat. I get it. I get that they're sixth in rushing in yards. That having been said, if Kirk Cousins, and I'm not trying to get negative here, but if Cousins was 80 yards away from a 5,000-yard season when he had Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson, granted, they had no run game to speak of that year. And I've always said if Cousins puts up 5,000 yards with the Vikings, something is terribly wrong. They can do better. Cousins theoretically could throw for 400 yards every week with these guys. I mean, nobody has a better 1-2 punch. And so I would love to see, I've seen a lot of people in Vikings media say they need to put the ball in Cousins' hands and air it out and not rely so much on the run game. I do not agree with that at all. I think that, you look at a game like the Chiefs game where they were 30th against the run, and the Vikings, for whatever reason, got away from running the type of runs that they were good at, and they more relied on the passing game, and it did not work. This 49ers defense is good against the pass, and it's not great against the run. This team does so much better when Dalvin Cook is getting yards on first and second down, and it's third and short. I think you can do that, especially running to the right. I think that if you get rid of any of those trick plays that end up backfiring and getting them in second and 20 or whatever, Dalvin should be able to pick up 4 or 5 yards on first down. Then you have second and 5, second and 4, second and 3. Then you can, if you're the midfield, that's when you take your shots. But I agree with you. I think that this team should be a lot more dangerous than it is. I think it should be a lot more quick strike than it is. And hopefully we'll see some of that today. And Calvin reiterated his point. I understand what you're saying, that when you run the ball a tremendous amount of times, that typically means that you're running out the clock and you're just handing the ball off a lot. My point is that you're still not going to get 30 runs just by running the ball before the victory formation. There's some aspect of that is because you're also running the ball as part of your game plan. I think we've seen that this season. I think that the balanced offense because on the other side of it, well, I agree with you. I think that that's a misleading stat partially. I think that you do run the ball more when you're ahead. And so, of course, when that stat comes out that you run the ball 30 times and you're undefeated, that doesn't necessarily mean if you just force the ball today 30 times you're going to win. It means that you tend to run more to run out the clock when you're winning. So it's, again, I get it. But I think that in this context, this Vikings team does better when it is a run-first team, and they build off that through the play action and getting Cousins out of the pocket. And so I don't think it's entirely misleading because as we've seen, when Dalvin has big games, the Vikings tend to win outside of that first Packers game. Calvin, what's your score prediction? And Tang, you gave me yours if you want to give it again. Tang says we need to show that we can still play offensively without Dalvin Cook. Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to not feel completely reliant on a guy. But I think that when you have the best running back in the NFL, it's hard to separate some of that success. And I totally get what you mean, though, that you want, especially with Thielen back, you want to see what you think we should have, which is what I think we should have, which is damn near the greatest show on turf. I mean, you have a quarterback who's extremely accurate down the field. You have the best 2 wide receivers in the league playing in tandem. You have a tight end who catches everything you throw his way, so on and so forth. But I think the reason that we haven't seen that is because Zimmer is extremely conservative and he wants to play old school football. and so we don't get a ton of shots down the field. Granted, I feel like maybe that would not have been the case had Thielen not gotten injured. When he got injured, this team was offensively playing extremely well in his absence, but it was playing in a really balanced and methodical way. I think it was a silver lining in that we got to see more from BC and Irv Smith Jr. and Kyle Rudolph and more heavy formations, heavy personnel, I mean. And I don't necessarily think we would have seen that had Thielen not gotten injured. And so now that he's back, and really we only got to see the Thielen that we knew for a half, I think we very well may see more of that. And again, I don't want them to get away from what they're good at or what they've learned. But when you bring Thielen back into it, now you have a myriad of options you didn't have before, and it makes this offense much more dangerous. And so it's hard for me to say, well, Stefanski should be doing better because Thielen was gone for so long, especially after they kind of figured out what worked best with Cousins in this offense, with this offensive line, this running back. And so it's exciting for him to be back. That's why it was so freaking scary to hear that his ankle injury. I'm like, oh my God, what did he like break it? Did he sprain it? The cut's, I guess, the best possible option there. But yeah, we've only had a half of football, and what did we see from it? I mean, they went to him deep in overtime, and he caught it. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of that today. I just think that it's all going to still come through the run, especially to the right side, and picking up, like Seattle did against us. 5, 6, 7 yards on first down. If they can do that, that opens up so many options. If you have a 2nd and 2, you're able to take more shots because you're just assuming you're going to get those 2 yards. Calvin says Thielen was rusty to start the Saints game. Yes, he fumbled. He missed a catch that would have been spectacular, but he routinely makes those type of catches. And I think outside of, again, his ankle injury, that he's the Thielen that we know. Tang says, you saw what happened with the 2016 Falcons and the Shanahan, with Kyle Shanahan. Imagine even greater things with the Vikings offense. Yeah, I mean, ironically, that was the year they went to the Super Bowl, right? And we're up a whole bunch of points and then lost. Ironically, Shanahan runs a really similar offense to the Vikings one. So, yeah, it's not hard to imagine that. But again, to summarize, run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, play action, play action, play action, take the shots on 2nd down and short. Make the 49ers a one-dimensional offense. If you get a lead and you're good if you can shut down that 21 personnel run game, you're going to put the ball into Garoppolo's hands and force him to beat you, especially considering how this Vikings team has played against tight ends. He might have to rely on his receivers. He's not entirely good at going through his progressions or looking off the safety. And apparently, according to Everson Griffin, he plays scared, or they got him scared. And so I think that with those things in mind, the Vikings may end up winning the turnover battle, which will be incredibly important. It'll also take the crowd out of it. I think that if Zimmer was able to rattle someone like Drew Brees, then the same should go tenfold for Jimmy Garoppolo. And it's because of those things that I'm confident the Vikings will win this game. I'm knocking on wood. I'm hoping to God that they play their game and they don't get too cute. But I think with the short week and all the lessons they've learned, that they won't. And so I really appreciate you guys stopping by for the pregame. I'll be here for the halftime show. I'm going to reorganize my shelf. I'm going to euthanize my cat. I'm going to eat a corn dog in front of her before I do it. And I, again, appreciate everyone stopping by. If you want to, we would love to have you for the live chat. I'm about to launch that article in a few minutes. It's on VikingsTerritory.com and purplePTSD.com. We have a message board. We have the ability for you to create user groups, unique avatars and customizable profiles with DMs and friends and followers. The difference there is we have actually an internal system that's a lot like Twitter. It's like a global activity wall where you can embed videos, integrate your Instagram photos, do hashtags, and you can actually post there, and then people can follow you a la Twitter. Activity points like karma. There's just a lot of cool things there, and all we really need is you guys. Yeah, the structures are in place. We just need people to show up and start using them, and it's very, very hard because people join. We have not. Oh, it was 1,000 people that have joined, but if there's not, you know, activity, then no one talks. So stop by the chat. You don't need to create an account if you don't want to, but if you want to, it's free. I'll be there. I'm sure Tang will be there. A bunch of our writers will be there. But let's go. Next time I see you guys, it'll be halftime. So let's hope it's good things. I have a good feeling, and